They're standing up for you, Elaine, and for the decision you made. Conference, thanks to Paddy and to Dave Anderson, to all the fabulous speeches in the debate before, and to Vernon and all the guests we've had this morning. I should start by apologising that I've got a bit of a husky voice after 4 months on the campaign trail, all those hustings. Although I have to say our campaign party karaoke didn't help at the weekend, but I apologise for that. But look, conference, we're here in this hall. Today, all across our country, there are millions of children who are going to school no longer putting up with leaking roofs or peeling walls, but instead going to one of the 4,000 brand new or fully refurbished schools built in the last 13 years by our Labour government. So when people say to you that politics doesn't make a difference, that you're all the same, let us be proud of what we achieved. The best generation of teachers we've ever had. Over 120,000 more teaching assistants, 3,500 Sure Start children's centres, more young people going to university or to an apprenticeship than ever before. Standards rising to record levels, but standards rising fastest in the poorest communities. Conference, that is a record of which we can be truly proud. And I would like you to join me today in thanking my predecessors, in thanking David Blunkett, in thanking Estelle Morris, Charles Clarke, Ruth Kelly, Alan Johnson, and all the brilliant team of ministers who've worked with me over the last 3 years for the enormous contribution they've made to our conference. Let's thank them today. And I'd also like to pay tribute to David Miliband, who, as Schools Minister, made the inspired decision to start the Building Schools for the Future programme. Conference, David Miliband has made a massive contribution already, and he has a huge contribution to make in the future. But we know too, every one of us in this hall, that the biggest difference is made by the teachers and the teaching assistants, by the heads and the caretakers, by the social workers and the nursery school staff, by the school cooks and the catering assistants at lunchtime, all the people who every day in their hard work are transforming the lives of children up and down our country. They are the real heroes, and we should say thank you to every one of them. We've just heard from Vernon and Neil Wilson and Paul and other colleagues today about the huge difference our Labour government has made. And from Neil in his school, Newell Green High School here in Manchester, I'm proud that we've gone from, in 1997, 1 in 2 schools not meeting our basic benchmark to just 1 in 20 schools because of National Challenge, and schools I fear now Michael Gove will abandon. Because Michael Gove's short-sighted, arbitrary, unfair decision to scrap Building Schools for the Future will mean over 700,000 children in 700 schools will now not get the new school building they were promised. And as we heard from Elaine, he couldn't even publish a list of cancelled schools and get it right. 5 different lists he had to publish to tell people that bad news. And we've heard from Elaine, a former Tory councillor, today proud to be a Labour councillor fighting for fairness for all children her award. Thank you very much, Elaine. And Michael Gove, the man they told us was a genius, the Tories' rising star. They don't say that anymore. In opposition, he may have been able to write good jokes for the House of Commons, but it is no joke for the hundreds of thousands of children whose hopes have been dashed and their school buildings have been cancelled all around the country. But when I hear Michael Gove say, look, new buildings don't make the difference. I remember going to open a new school last year in Knowsley, in a deprived ward in Merseyside, and going around the magnificent new school building with the children and talking to them about the school and saying, what do you think of the new building? What makes the biggest difference? What is exciting about this? And thinking they would talk about the AstroTurf or the new canteen or the new science block or the new IT suite. And do you know what a girl said to me from year 9? She said, we never thought anybody would ever think we were worth a place like this. And I said to the head teacher, I said, this is what she had said. And he said, you've got to understand all these millions of pounds. There's never been a building like this built here for decades. And my job is to take this investment and use it to boost aspirations and say to the children and to the parents, look, work hard, use this opportunity, show them you are truly worth it. That is why it is such a tragedy in Liverpool and in Sandwell and in Brent and in Nottingham and in Wakefield and in 80 local authorities all around the country. Michael Gove has said to hundreds of thousands of children, you're not worth it. And that is why I was proud to join the NES-UWT and ATL and the NUT and Unite and GMB and Unison and UCAT, all with parents and governors and teachers on our Save Our Schools rally back in June to say to Michael Gove, think again, change your mind, our children are worth it. But Michael Gove's not just cancelling new buildings. He's also narrowing our curriculum and engaging in such an unfair free market education experiment. A few weeks ago, I went to see a new BSF building being built in Tameside at Mossley Hollins School, set to open in February. We had a tour of the building site with the school council and we looked at the new canteen, the new science labs and the new dance studio. Yes, the new dance studio. Michael Gove says schools should only be teaching academic subjects, and he says to schools in a sneering way they should shun subjects like design, technology, music, drama, sports, construction. I don't think Michael Gove has got a clue about education in our country. Countless times I've been to visit schools and met the head teacher, and he's taken me to see a science lesson, but also she's taken me to see the dance GCSE lesson being taught. And the head teacher will say, look at those children in that class. It's not just great teaching, it's not just a good GCSE, but the motivation and self-belief that that lesson will inspire will boost their results in maths and English GCSE as well. That is great teaching, that is great leadership. And I think we should celebrate. And I just wish Michael Gove would celebrate the achievements of our teachers and our pupils and stop running them down in the way he does all the time. But what really upsets me is that as Michael Gove is dashing the hopes of children in our state schools with buildings councils, he and David Cameron are also travelling around the country promising to a few parents a new building, but only if they're willing to opt out of the state system and any relationship with the local authority and to go it alone, to go for one of the DIY free market schools, a policy which we know from Sweden delivered lower standards and greater inequality, a policy which even the Liberal Democrat Conference agrees is divisive, costly and unfair, a policy which will divide communities, which will disadvantage children with a special educational need. Conference, this is the most socially divisive piece of education policy in the last 60 years. Our policy was clear in our children's plan. We had a moral cause. It wasn't just every other child, it was every child we wanted to help. And we said, look, every child has got talent and potential, but for some children it's sometimes harder because they face greater barriers, whether it's a disability or special need, or sometimes the place they've grown up, the income of their parents. But if the community comes together and works together, we can break down those barriers and give children the support so that they can succeed and fulfill their potential. And our academies gave more help and support to underperforming schools in the most disadvantaged communities. Michael Gove's academies give extra resources to outstanding schools in the more affluent communities. and he has cancelled many of the radical reforms of our children's plan. Guaranteed one-to-one tuition for any child who falls behind, cancelled. Free school meals for 500,000 children, the result of the campaigning of Unison, the GMB, Mary Turner, and all of you in this hall, ditched by Michael Gove. Breakfast clubs for disadvantaged children, ridiculed. Social work reform shelved. The new pay negotiating body for support staff cancelled. Hundreds of new play areas all around the country scrapped. What a shameful record after just 5 months in government. And that is Michael Gove's record. Conference. Our children's plan was important because it said no child should be held back through the lack of proper support, whatever their extra need. That's why Alan Johnson and I asked John Bercow to review speech and language support. And this is a personal thing for me. I've had a stammer all my life. That's why in the past at conference I've sometimes had to speak without notes. I only started to talk about it recently when I was in the cabinet, because it's only by talking about it and being open about it that you can deal with it. I was lucky. I was pretty tough. I've had help, including from a vet and my friends. But the lesson for me is so clear. There are hundreds of thousands of children all around the country who struggle with their speech or communication, their reading or their learning, or a disability which holds them back. But struggling on alone without support and the understanding of those around you will never get you through. But if you can help a child deal with something like that, if you can help them to believe in themselves too, then you put the future back into their hands. That's why I'm in politics. That's why I think we're all in politics, to give every child the support they need to succeed. That is Labour's moral cause. So when anyone tells us that after 13 years in government, Labour needs a period in opposition, I think they need their heads examining. People say to me, Ed, you're good at opposition. I reply, I hate opposition. Because however effective we are at holding this coalition to account, if we're out of power, we can't turn people's aspirations into reality. If we're out of power, we can't protect the vulnerable and help those most in need. If we're out of power, we can't get those children the support they need and deserve. We can stand up for jobs, for social justice, we can fight for equality and for fairness, but if we are out of power, we can't deliver. And that is why we need a Labour government back in power just as soon as we can. And yet, after 4 months travelling around the country, as a candidate for the leadership of our party, and I know Ed and all the other candidates will agree with this, despite the general election result, the Labour Party, the Cooperative Party, the trade union members I've met, they're not down and despondent. They are energised and unified and determined to do what it takes to get us back into government. And let me tell you one reason why our membership is so determined and why our membership is surging. 2 words, Nick Clegg. Don't forget, at last year's conference, when the sun came out for the Conservatives, David Cameron was on track in the polls for an 80-seat majority. But David Cameron failed to convince the country his party had changed and that he could be trusted. It wasn't the sun what won it. It wasn't the sun which put David Cameron into power. It was Nick Clegg. It was the man who put on his own leaflets in the election, vote Liberal Democrat or you'll get a Tory government. The man who said, stop the Tory VAT bombshell. The man who said spending cuts now would be reckless and put jobs at risk. It was Nick Clegg who gave us a Tory Prime Minister, a Tory Chancellor, a massive and unfair hike in VAT, and as George Osborne's own budget advisor has told us, a budget that hits the poorest hardest. And I say, look, to Liberal Democrat MPs, it is one thing to want to be in power. It is another thing to sacrifice your principles and your manifesto for power. But it's one thing to sacrifice your manifesto and your principles for power. But to do that on the backs of the poor and the unemployed and the pensioner and the vulnerable, that is a disgrace. But it's very important we remember this and we learn this lesson. We're shocked when we see Liberal Democrats propping up this coalition. If we're shocked, just think how shocked are all the people who voted Liberal Democrat in the election. But there's a more important reason why our party is determined, and Peter Wheeler said it in the debate. Because we know this is a Conservative government. It's the Conservatives we've got to beat to win the next election. Nick Clegg may look like David Cameron, he may increasingly sound like David Cameron, but it is David Cameron who's in charge. And however much David Cameron and George Osborne try to use the Liberal Democrats as a human shield, we mustn't let the Tories off the hook, because the very future of our public services, our welfare state, our economy are now in peril because of the reckless and deeply ideological direction this Tory coalition government has taken us. Take the decision to cancel building schools for the future. It's not just educationally short-sighted and unfair. As Ed said yesterday, it also risks putting hundreds of thousands of private construction workers out of work at just the time when the private sector is holding back from investing in private homes or private buildings. And when the Tories and the Liberal Democrats say to us, but look, we had to cancel building schools for the future, we had no choice, getting the deficit down is the first priority. When they say to us, look, there is no alternative, let us remember, first of all, that the last politician to say there is no alternative was Margaret Thatcher back in 1980. And we remember what happened to our communities and to manufacturing, but also youth unemployment rising year on year for 5 years. But the politician before Margaret Thatcher as Prime Minister to say there is no alternative was a Labour Prime Minister. In 1931, our Prime Minister Ramsay MacDonald, 2 years after the 1929 Wall Street crash, the second biggest financial crisis now of the last 100 years, MacDonald said to this party, there's no alternative. We've got to cut spending now. We've got to cut support for the unemployed. It's the only way to get the deficit down and reassure the financial markets. But this party said no to MacDonald. And so did the Liberals and Lloyd George and Keynes. And MacDonald had to go into coalition with the Conservatives to put through his cuts. And what happened? The Great Depression of the 1930s, unemployment rising year by year, the deficit getting worse, not better. Conference, you either learn the lessons of history or you repeat the mistakes of history, and that is what they are doing at the moment. Just think if Clement Attlee had said in 1945, but our national debt at the end of the Second World War was over twice its current level, that the first priority is to get the deficit down. There'd have been no NHS, no homes built for returning heroes. There'd have been no post-war welfare state. But we don't need to go back to the history books to see the warning signs over George Osborne and David Cameron's economic policy. We only need to look across the Irish Sea. 2 years ago, the Irish government convinced itself they had to slash public services and cut child benefit to get their deficit down as fast as possible and reassure the money markets. And you know what? The IMF praised the Irish government for their sense of urgency. And what's happened since? Recession turned to slump. Unemployment at a 16-year high, 19 consecutive months of deflation, consumer spending and tax revenues plummeting, the deficit worse now than when they started. The Irish economist David McWilliams said this week, it's like watching a slow car crash. The more they cut, the more the economy will continue to stagnate. George Osborne used to say a few years ago that Ireland has so much to teach us if only we were willing to learn. Now he is the one who's ignoring the lessons of the Irish experience. Just imagine if Alistair Darley and Gordon Brown had listened to George Osborne and David Cameron in 2008 and not nationalised the banks, not cut VAT. not invested in new jobs, the recession would have turned to depression, unemployment would be much higher today. And Conference, I would just like to say to you, I was proud to serve in Gordon Brown's cabinet. We didn't get everything right, but he was the right Prime Minister for a world financial crisis, and history will give him the credit he deserves. Look, of course we need tough decisions to get the deficit down. Decisions we've taken, more tough decisions to come. But Alistair Darling and Gordon Brown were also right to say, don't start to cut the deficit until the recovery is secure. Conference, there is an alternative. There is a Labour alternative. We have to win the argument, as Alistair said on Monday, that the speed and severity of the coalition's ideological cuts are both unfair and unnecessary and will put the recovery at risk. And we must make the case, as Ed Miliband did yesterday, that the credible way to reduce the deficit and get the economy moving is not to sacrifice jobs and growth, but to put growth and jobs first. That is the Labour alternative. Look, too many people have worked too hard over the last 3 years to get us through this economic storm to let George Osborne throw it away. So I think this conference should send out a clear message to George Osborne and David Cameron. And that message is, whenever you put at risk the jobs we protected, whenever you put at risk the homes we saved from repossession, whenever you push more children and pensioners back into poverty, Labour will be there. We will fight you every inch of the way. And Conference, there is a third reason, a third really important reason why I believe we're up for the fight in this Labour Party now. I believe our Labour leadership contest has shown we've learned the lessons of Labour history from the 50s and the 80s and from more recent times, that to divide is fatal, to look inwards and blame the voters spell disaster. I've been really proud to be a candidate in this leadership election, the first ever cooperative MP to be a candidate. And I want to thank all the colleagues who supported me, and also the CWU, all the party members, the trade unionists, the councillors who helped us in our campaign, all of my brilliant campaign team, too many to mention, but thank you to all of you. And also to Yvette for her immense tolerance over the last few months. People have asked us, as we've been around the last few days, what's the most embarrassing moment of the last 4 months? And for me, well, look, having a branded Ed Balls for leader driving slowly through busy traffic was deeply embarrassing at times. We were never sure whether people were yelling out, "Give up" or "Good luck," but I decided... but the best moment, the most embarrassing moment, was actually in Bradford. And I told this story at the TUC, but I'll tell it again, because it was just after the local elections, and packed meeting in Bradford, loads of people there, and had this brilliant new councillor who gave me the most fabulous warm-up. And he said, "We've got him here today. He's great on policy. He's a great campaigner. Here with us today, the next leader of the Labour Party, the next Prime Minister of our country, Ed Miliband, is here with us." I'd like to say that there was embarrassed silence. Half of the audience cheered. They thought I was Ed Miliband. The councillor said, he said, "I'm terribly sorry." He said, "At least I didn't call you David." I said, "At least you didn't call me Diane." That would have been even more. But the fact is, David, Andy, Diane, they were great candidates. I think they were a credit to our party. I think we've conducted this election in a truly... And I think we conducted this election in a truly comradely way. But for the four of us who finished behind Ed Miliband, there is no shame in losing to a candidate who has inspired and energised our party, as we saw from the standing ovation he received yesterday in this hall. I've worked with Ed for 16 years, and I know firsthand that when he talks about fairness and opportunity and social justice, these aren't just words or slogans. Those are the things which got him into work every day. Those are the things which are in the core of his being. So I would like to say to Ed, look, for 16 years, you have been a colleague and a friend, and I've been proud to call you a colleague and a friend, and now I'm proud to call you the leader of our party. And conference, it will be my mission to back our new leader, to take the fight to this coalition, to return our Labour Party back to government in the shortest possible time. And conference, let that be the mission of us all, united, disciplined, determined, winning the argument for a credible and radical Labour alternative. There is an alternative. Together, let us make sure Labour wins again. Thank you.